This video is the start of my personal quest to find the 10 greatest Detroit Pistons of all time. I've narrowed down my candidates to about 20 right now, but we're going to start things off with Isiah Thomas, and then eventually, hopefully, I will be doing a video just ranking them one by one. But when I do these videos, it is to better inform myself and attempt to provide information about a player that you might have not known before. But in this video, we're going to start off with Isiah Thomas, who is pretty unanimously considered the greatest Piston of all time. And after doing my research for this video, it's kind of hard to come to any other conclusion. But just how good was Isiah Thomas? We'll start off by talking about Isiah Thomas's regular season career. He played in 979 regular season games with the Pistons, averaged 19.2 points per game, shot 44.1% from the field, and 29% from three. The three-point percentage is a little bit misleading, and we will get to why later in the video. He averaged 9.3 assists per game, 3.6 rebounds per game, 1.9 steals per game. Thomas's notable accomplishments include winning a championship 2 times. He was a 12-time All-Star. He was All-Rookie First Team. He was a 5-time All-NBA selection, 3-time First Team selection, 2-time Second Team selection. He was a 1-time NBA Finals MVP, a 2-time All-Star Game MVP, and he led the NBA in assists per game 1 time as well. So clearly, Thomas had very solid production, but it was even more solid than you think. Thomas had 4 20 and 10 seasons, meaning 4 20 points and 10 assists or 10 rebound seasons. In Thomas's case, he had 4 20-point and 10 assist seasons. Thomas has the second most 20 and 10 seasons in Detroit Pistons history. He had 9, 10, 8, and 1 seasons. In this case, it was minimum of 10 points, 8 assists, and 1 steal. That type of season is the most in Pistons history. Thomas averaged 20 points per game in 5 different seasons with the Pistons. That is top 4 in Pistons history. Thomas had 5 seasons of averaging 2 or more steals per game. That is number 1 in Pistons history. He had 421 double-doubles with the Pistons. That is most in Pistons history. 5 triple-doubles. Second most in Pistons history behind Grant Hill. 18,822 points. 9,061 assists. 1,861 steals. All 3 of those things lead the Pistons franchise. And it's also worth noting that he collected 3,478 rebounds. That is the most among guards in Pistons history. Thomas is the all-time Piston leader in points, assists, and steals. That is 3 out of 5 categories. That's not bad at all. That's about as strong of a case as you're going to see for the greatest Piston of all time. The second Thomas stepped into Detroit, his impact was felt pretty much immediately. Prior to Thomas joining the Pistons, they were a total dumpster fire with a 21-61 record. Then, in comes Isiah Thomas, and he helped get the Pistons all the way up to a 39-43 record, an 18-game improvement. He got the Pistons to the playoffs by the 1983-1984 season with the help of Chuck Daly. By the 1986-87 season, Thomas had helped get his team to the Eastern Conference Finals. By the 1987-88 season, Thomas got his team to the NBA Finals with the help of Joe Dumars, who was starting to come into his own. And then by the 1988-89 season, Thomas had officially led the Detroit Pistons to their first ever NBA championship. So we saw that Thomas came in and turned a total dumpster fire of a franchise into something respectable. But check out these contributions that he made to getting this team out of the depths of hell. When the Pistons made the playoffs for the first time during the Isiah Thomas era, Thomas had an all-star supporting cast that consisted of Bill Laimbeer and Kelly Tripucka. And he had 1 20-point-per-game scorer in Kelly Tripucka as well. However, during the 1983-84 season, Thomas led the Pistons in points, assists, and steals. That is going to be a major theme for a pretty big chunk of the rest of this video. In the 1986-87 season, the season in which Thomas got the Pistons to the Eastern Conference Finals, he had an all-star supporting cast that consisted of Bill Laimbeer and one 20-point per game scorer in Adrian Dantley. However, even with the all-star supporting cast of Bill Laimbeer and the 20-point per game scorer in Adrian Dantley, Thomas led the Pistons in assists and steals in the regular season. But in the playoffs, Thomas led the Pistons in points, assists, and steals. Thomas led the Pistons in 3 out of 5 categories, getting his team to the Eastern Conference Finals in the playoffs. And then, when he got his team to the NBA Finals, he had a supporting cast that consisted of one 20-point per game scorer in Adrian Dantley. Thomas was the lone all-star on the Pistons in the 1987-88 season. Thomas led the Pistons in assists and steals in the regular season, and then again in the postseason, he got it up to leading his team in points, assists, and steals. So Thomas had a huge role in turning this franchise around, leading the team in 3 out of 5 categories in multiple playoff appearances and in multiple playoff runs. When the Pistons won their back-to-back championships from the 1988-89 season to the 1989-90 season, Thomas led the Pistons in points, assists, and steals throughout the playoffs in both of those runs. However, during the 1989 NBA Finals, Isiah Thomas finally got a little bit more help from one of his other teammates. Joe Dumars won the NBA Finals MVP in the 1989 Finals. Dumars actually led the Pistons in points during the NBA Finals. Dumars was starting to come into his own in the 87-88 season, but I would call this Finals MVP performance the official coming out party. And then in the 1989-90 season, Isiah Thomas led the Pistons in points, assists, and steals in the playoffs, and he also led the Pistons in points, assists, and steals in the NBA Finals. Thomas won the NBA Finals MVP, averaging 27.6 points per game, 7 assists, 5.2 rebounds, and 1.6 steals per game. Simply incredible performance. So Isiah Thomas, once again, like I said, played a ginormous role in turning the Pistons around and leading this team to a championship. So we saw that Isiah Thomas carried a pretty large workload during his time in the playoffs. But check this out. He carried a large workload while elevating his game in certain aspects. He increased his points per game in the postseason. He did average a little bit less assists per game, but he increased his rebounding and his steals in the playoffs. His field goal percentage went down a little bit, but here's why I said his 3-point field goal percentage in the regular season was slightly misleading. He improved his 3-point shooting by over 5% once the playoffs got going. And it's also worth noting that he increased his 3-point field goal percentage while taking more threes in the playoffs than he took in the regular season on a per-game basis. Thomas attempted 1.9 threes per game in the regular season, but attempted 2.1 threes per game in the playoffs. Here's some other notable things about Isiah Thomas elevating his game in the playoffs. Isiah Thomas averaged 20 points per game in the playoffs 6 times, and that is the most in Pistons history. He averaged 8 assists per game in the playoffs 8 times, most in Pistons history. Averaged 2 steals per game in the playoffs 6 times, most in Pistons history. He averaged 20 points per game, 8 assists per game, and 2 steals per game in the playoffs 6 times, and that's just the most all-time period of that specific stat line in those particular categories of 20 plus points per game, 8 plus assists per game, and 2 plus steals per game. Also, Isiah Thomas shot 68.8% from three-point land in the 1990 NBA Finals. That is the 3rd best among Finals MVPs, but that doesn't even tell the whole story because number 1 and number 2 are Hakeem Olajuwon, who only took 1 3 total in both of his Finals MVP performances. Isiah Thomas took way more threes than Olajuwon did during his Finals MVP performance. Isiah Thomas has 2,261 playoff points, which is the 2nd most in Pistons history. He has 987 playoff assists, That is number 1 in Pistons history. He has 234 playoff steals, which is the most in Pistons history. I'm pretty sure that a decent chunk of you have begun to sense a theme by now. Isiah Thomas was consistently leading his team in plenty of categories, and he is the all-time Piston leader in points, assists, and steals. And in the playoffs, he's number 2 in playoff points, number 1 in playoff assists, and number 1 in playoff steals when it comes to Pistons history. So, Isiah Thomas was pretty good. It's going to be really hard to not rank him as the greatest Piston of all time. But was he better than you even thought? Let me know in the comments below. And as always, thank you for watching.